Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking about legal jobs with special guest Rachel Gezerseh. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with Rachel Gezerseh about how to find a legal job you'll actually like and how to break into big law if that's what you're looking for. Rachel is a California-based lawyer, professor, and author of the recent book, The Law Career Playbook, a guerrilla guide to getting a legal job you actually like. She spent 10 years in big law and is now a partner at a boutique law firm, Liang Lai. Welcome, Rachel, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, it's my pleasure.
So first of all, can you give our listeners an idea a bit more about your background and how you ended up in the legal profession in the first place?
Sure. I mean, that's an interesting story because I'm not one of those people that always knew that I wanted to go to law school. I actually come from a theater and artsy background. I was a documentary filmmaker for a while. Yeah, so I had that career prior. But, you know, in that career, I didn't really like being unemployed, and I was unemployed a lot of the times in between gigs.
Yeah.
And one of my crap jobs, as I used to call them, when you'd be on unemployment, you know, and you're just trying to make ends meet, was I worked actually at Testmasters, a LSAT preparation company that we're all familiar with, even to this day. I was not an LSAT instructor, which is part of my story, is I never did well in the LSAT, but I was the phone answering girl at Testmasters. So, and, you know, but, you know, they treated me really well, and they actually let me take their prep classes with Robin Singh, you know, Mr. 180, Mr. Many 180s in the LSAT. And I got to sort of experience the thought of maybe, you know, if I do well in this thing, I could go to law school. And it sort of sparked the idea of law school in my mind. And I didn't do well. And I wound up actually only getting into one law school, which was Southwestern. But by that point, I was all in, and I was ready to sort of transition into this idea of becoming a lawyer and harnessing that power and what that meant to me, you know, having been an artist and, you know, just feeling like I was taking the next step in my life. So that's actually how I came to law school. It was a very, very backwards way of doing it.
Well, you know, we all have our own journeys. I was a theater person myself, so we're kindred spirits.
Yeah. Good. Good. Yeah. And, you know, and it's funny, I always tell this story, you know, people ask me, they're like, well, okay, how did you go from being artsy, you know, UCLA film undergrad girl to now going to Southwestern and suddenly wanting to work in big law? That seems like a leap. And it was, you know, and I think I talk with my students now about this all the time. There's something that happens when you get to law school, and it doesn't matter where you go to law school, but you start to hear about these jobs where you can make, you know, a ton of money and yet service really interesting clients and as an entry-level lawyer, and suddenly everyone wants big law. Right. It doesn't matter what your aspirations were coming in. And that definitely happened to me. You know, all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is the best of both worlds. I can do community work. I can do pro bono work. I can also make, at the time, $125,000, you know, entry level. Amazing. Right. So that was my journey to just this concept of big law.
Yeah, I think mine was a bit similar. I had a career before law school, and then when I was in law school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but it was one of those things where, you know, I was doing really well. I had gotten on the law review. I had won some awards, and then, you know, you just sign up for OCI, and then all of a sudden they're dangling these, you know, checks in front of you, and you're like, that sounds like it's not so bad. You know, then when I got there, I decided it wasn't a great fit for me, but it is interesting how you can kind of be lured in that direction, because, you know, there are attractive things about it. I mean, not beyond the paycheck, but I think for a lot of folks, you know, the paycheck is a way to soften the blow of loans and things like that. You know, a lot of us were saddled with when we left law school.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's how I found my initial way into big law.
Yeah. So we have a lot of law students that listen to this podcast. And so what do you think that law students should be thinking about, even from the beginning of law school, about the post-law job market?
Right. So, and I've since had a lot of time to reverse engineer my journey, right? And in thinking about this and all the things I wish I had done. And now having had, hundreds of students,
right.
I see what works and what doesn't work. And, I really think it's important to do the self-analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of law students don't know, right? I don't know what I want to be. I've never had exposure to lawyers, or maybe I have, and I don't want to be that kind of lawyer, but I don't know what I want to be. But it really is important. There are things, I think every student knows what they like, what's
right.
interesting to them. And so, starting that journey early of, and this is the tenet of my book and my class, is this concept of the informational interview, right? Like getting
right.
out and plugging in early to the profession to figure out what it really is and what the possibilities are, because there are vast possibilities of what you can do. And so as a law student and even a pre-law student, it's really important to start plugging in and taking charge of this yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Setting up these interviews and getting out there and I always tell my students, be a sponge.
Yeah.
Soak this stuff up, because it actually will inform your journey.
I think that that's really true. And one of the things Alison and I often talk about is a lot of times folks don't know what a day in the life of a lawyer is like, right. And I think that, when we watch TV shows, like I was just watching that, it's fairly silly, that Good Fight, which was based on The Good Wife. I was watching that last night.
Right.
And it's super dramatic, it's, and not really based in reality, but so often I think a lot of folks, the only way they've really interacted with the legal profession before entering law school is through shows, through
right.
shows or books or dramas. And the reality is life as like an associate is very different than that. Life
right.
as a partner is very different than that. And I think really if you can have these meetings and you can chat with people and really focus in on not only what's their overall legal experience, but what is their day-to-day life, it's very important to know. A lot of lawyers are sitting at a desk, not moving, typing all day. That some
right.
people like really thrive in that environment. Some people are in meetings all day or interacting with people. Some people are in court. Some people are working virtually. Some people are working in office. There are so many different options, but you don't even know what the options are until you start talking to people.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why it's such a huge, and I always tell my students, there's so many benefits to doing this, right? Because a natural network starts to form in your life, right? When you start reaching out, having these appointments, consistently following up with people, you actually build a network of mentors mm-hmm. who are cluing you into what's going on in the profession, helping you speak the lingo and letting you know sort of what the opportunities are out there. Because, the ideal situation is, you have OCI, you have career services, you have all these great resources at your school, but wouldn't it be amazing if on top of that, you've built this organic network of advocates out there working to ensure that you get the best job for you too, right?
Yeah.
So that's that's the idea. And as soon as you can start building that out, I recommend doing it. I think that's why I speak to the pre-law crowd all the time too, because they actually have more time. Once you're
right.
in law school, it's difficult to build in this time, although I advocate that everyone should build in at least a half an hour,
mm-hmm.
a day to just work on this stuff and building out and getting to know people.
Yeah. So I have to give my one plug is that never stand anybody up, because this is one of the things that I think does happen, especially with maybe the less experienced or the less professional students as they're coming in. Sometimes they don't treat all of these informational interviews as like part of your legal career and take them very seriously. But these, I think, I love meeting with law students, talking about job stuff, talking about whatever they want to talk about. It's why I do what I do. I love networking with people. I'll pretty much have coffee with just about anyone until you stand me up. And, and I will remember that. And you can never really ask me a favor again, right. unless, something extreme happened. And so, I do think that one of the things
right.
that people have to remember is that this is a great, exercise, but you need to be professional and serious about it.
I tell, I feel like the people who buy my book and the people who take my classes are serious about it.
Right.
I think that, any, and I always tell people like that when I do these speaking engagements, and it's Friday night, 8 p.m. and, they all show up in suits, that would have been me.
Right.
And so I really try to awaken that spark in people. Yes, of course you have to take it serious, because this is your life. No one else, I tell my students, you have to be the CEO of yourself. No one else is going to care about this as much as you are. And
right.
if you don't take it serious and you think that somehow law school is going to take care of it for you at the end, you are sorely mistaken. It just doesn't work that way anymore. I don't care where you go to school.
Yeah.
You have to take charge of this stuff yourself.
So true. So are there certain skills that law students should be developing while they're in law school to prepare them for the job market that they just won't learn in school, outside of talking to people, like doing informational interviews, but really skills?
Right. So I think that all of this comes down to communication, right? And I think that if students think about sort of in the bigger picture what these law school relationships that they're going to develop, how that could actually play out to their benefit beyond law school, right? If they think about strengthening those relationships now while they're there, that can actually become a huge life skill, right? And just learning how to connect and communicate with your peers while you're in school, how to communicate to them what your goals are as you're going through this process. I always tell my students, go onto LinkedIn and start doing research about potential areas. If you don't know what you want to do, start just looking at the universe. And this is before info interviews or anything. Just look at what the potential roles that are out there, and then start to talk to your peers about those, right? Start to develop an elevator pitch to your contemporaries and work on that, right? Because in the end, if you forge those sort of alliances and those, like-minded relationships in law schools, those could actually wind up, as you grow in your career, becoming, your clients, right? Like friends that you meet in law school could one day, and this has happened to me actually. So this is, I've actually have real life experience with those relationships that I built at those early stages, and how I went about them and how I stayed in touch actually wound up being huge enhancers in my career later on. So, when we're talking about building practical skills, like just look to the person to your left and to your right as you're sitting in that law school class, right? And start to develop those relationships then.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And what do you think is kind of the top advice for law students wanting to find a job that would be the best fit for them? I think you and I both already talked about, how attractive BigLaw can be for various reasons, but BigLaw is not the best fit for everybody. So how do people, maybe outside of just the informational interview, do you think it's, doing these kind of web searches and learning about things, but how do you know what's going to be a good fit
I think, and a big component of my book and the program that I teach is doing the internal work. Like I have, and I'll send this to anyone who's interested, or it's actually in the book as well. I have these worksheets for people to fill out, which is doing the internal, getting clear on those things that drive me, that I'm interested in. Okay, drilling down, well, connecting that to the realities of the profession. What is it, these things that I'm good at, these things that I get excited about in the morning that I'm going to be doing it that day? What in the profession, how can I find that, right? How can I find doing that and actually making money from that, because you're right. You mentioned before, a lot of times, a lot of lawyers sit, it's a very solitary experience, right? You spend a lot of time at your computer writing, researching. For someone like me, former documentary filmmaker girl, that's actually, I love that, right? I love the research and writing and sort of advocacy storytelling aspect of the law. Other people, not so much. They actually want to get out there and be in meetings, be on their feet, speaking with clients, be out there in court, perhaps being a DA, right? Having trial after trial after trial in court where you're on your feet, having to come up with decisions on the, and so you need to figure out for yourself, okay, what are the things just at the basic level that interest me? And then you explore it, right? Then you go out and you connect it to what's actually going on in the profession. So it's a lot about the internal work and getting in touch with what's driving you.
And I think there has to be an openness to even work on yourself. So I have a good friend who is a family law litigator. She's a partner now. She's very successful. And speaking in front of people used to make her want to throw up in the bathroom. And, but she really wanted to be a litigator. That was what she wanted to do. And so, every time I talk to her about how often she's in court now, I still chuckle, 10 years later. And I think that, she just knew that goal required her to do some heavy lifting for herself to get to be that person who wanted to do that. And so, if you've got these kind of pain points or these areas where you can work on yourself to reach these goals, I think that's totally fine. People go to Toastmasters if they're not good at talking in front of people. People take acting classes or do improv comedy or lots of different things if they find that they don't have the skills necessary, but their calling is to, be a trial lawyer, meet with clients, work with people who are in crisis. And
well, right.
Like
and
that.
It's all, it's a volume game too. It's about exposing yourself to those experiences as well, which is another reason why I think the whole info interview and just sort of putting yourself out there strategy works really well for people. Because just taking my story, I was a really shy person, right? And still am. And I'm not comfortable. Like, I was really, really good at doing the research and creating the interview opportunity for myself, and then really bad when I actually would get to the interview of making a good impression. Right. And the only way I got better was by doing so many of these interviews, right? And getting more comfortable in my own skin, learning what it really means to make eye contact, not shifty eye contact, but real, authentic eye contact. That took me 20 interviews to get there. So, I tell my students, let's be realistic. Let's expose ourselves to these uncomfortable experiences, get through them, because it only will make you better.
That's true. And you're right. Practicing is critical for that. The eye contact is interesting. I'm on this mailing list for the Gottman Institute.
Yes.
Have you heard of that? Yes. Are you, anyway, they've got a great mailing list. It's called like the Marriage Minutes or something like that. You don't need to be married to be a part of this mailing list. And, but it's fascinating because they send out a tidbit about relationships like once a week. And today's email was on eye contact.
Oh, wow.
Believe it or not. And it was actually the importance of eye contact and how when you are talking with someone, the eye contact actually creates stimulation in the other person's brain. So that it's so important to make that eye contact with someone. And so I think it's a really great point that if you are engaging someone in a serious conversation, if you're not comfortable with that eye contact, you can practice. You can practice with your friends, with your loved ones, with your family, but you just have to practice. We can all get better at this.
Yeah. And there's so much that goes into it, right? Because, the reason why I, speaking from experience, had trouble making eye contact is because I felt like an imposter, right? I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I was, I didn't do well in the LSAT. I was an artist. I was not supposed to be in the BigLaw, the vaulted interview, right? And so because of that, I was actually unable to sit up in my chair and feel like an equal in the situation, right? And, this is with a lot of sort of thinking back on it, but, I think a lot of students experience that. They don't feel on equal footing with the professionals that they're meeting with. And so it's hard for them to act authentic and act with confidence. And the only way you get there is by just doing it a lot.
So true. I mean, when I had my first job, I was a consultant at an international consulting firm. I was 22, and I'm from a very small town, and I was standing, I live in San Francisco. I was standing in one of the towers in downtown San Francisco overlooking the Bay Bridge. And I remember thinking, do they know that I 4 years ago was in high school in the Central Valley? Do they know that? And it's of course they know that. They read my resume. Right. They interviewed me. They hired me. But I think almost everyone has those moments where they're just do they really know who I am?
Right. They're going to find out.
Sure they do.
They're going to find out who I really am.
Right. Do they know that I am really out of my league?
Right.
But eventually I was quite good at what I did. And so, there was a reason why they hired me. I think that you have to find ways to cope with those feelings. And, imposter syndrome is really real for a lot of people. I think most of us have it maybe except overconfident men. Sorry for the men listening to the podcast, but they don't tend to have as much imposter syndrome. But I think for a lot of folks, you have to make peace with that and have coping mechanisms for that and recognize it and look for it.
Right. And build the muscle memory, build those experiences where you actually do connect and feel authentic and feel like you are supposed to be there. That actually creates a memory in your body so that you carry that with you to the next experience. And that's the only way I got better. And that's why it was so great that my Jones Day interview was my last interview, and also makes sense why I got that job. Because I went through all these other experiences, some of which were just, not great. But helped still. Were very, very useful for me to get to that point where I felt like I could nail a BigLaw job. Yeah.
It's very funny. It wasn't my only job offer, but the BigLaw job I took was my last interview.
Right.
And what was interesting about that interview was it had been OCIs. This was for summer associate positions. I think I had done not as many as a lot of people, but I'd done 15 or 17 or something like that. And this was the last one. I was really tired. I had 2 offers. Right. And so I was maybe a little bit confident.
Right.
And they had rescheduled it. So I'd been in my suit all day, which I was really cranky about. And so by the time I got there, it was, it's like 4:00 in the afternoon. I've been like in my suit all day at school, and the partner, is sitting in there, and I was just like, I'm just going to check the box for this one. Right. I didn't want to get in trouble for not showing up. So I show up. I remember, we were talking and he's asking me all these questions. And at one point he's like, what is the thing you are, you're self-conscious about, or what's your weakness? And I'm like, well, I'm kind of a terrible speller. I've never been very good at it. And it's kind of one of my things. I really try and watch. And his response was, I hate it when people say things that aren't true just to make themselves look good.
Wow.
And I was like, and I looked at him, I was like, no, I'm being serious. That's like a real thing for me. And then I told him like the story from my childhood where I like wrote something and misspelled it on this little art project. And then a family member made fun of me for it. And I was like kind of torn up about it. And he just looked at me, but I didn't care at this point. Right. I was like, there's no way I'm getting this job. Right. This guy clearly doesn't like me. He thinks I'm just making stuff up. So I felt like I was kind of blowing off the rest of the interview. And then, not only did I get the offer, he told the recruiter I was his favorite interview.
Wow. But I mean, talk about authenticity though, right? Because the currency that creates for people, I think cannot be underestimated, right? Yeah. I felt the same. Like I just had moments in that Jones day in my final callback interview where I knew I had the job even before I walked out of there, because just these shared moments of connecting with people on that level, right? Yeah. And I'd gone through enough pain to be able to recognize those moments.
Right. Yeah. So, there is that moment of finding that. I think it is authenticity. It's that authentic professional version of yourself. Right. That you're willing to share. And I think putting on the suit's a big part of that. I think, you and I are both kind of like theater arts people. Like for me, being on stage, getting into costume, like all of that was all part of this production of this persona, that I could get up in front of thousands of people and not be nervous and things like that. And I feel like dressing up to be a lawyer, or even when I would teach in a law school, I'd get dressed. I didn't like show up in my yoga pants.
That's right.
Like I might, this is shocking. I'm doing a podcast not in my yoga pants, but I didn't get dressed up for you though. I will say, but okay. But there is that, that you put on your gear, or you've got this persona, and then you're comfortable in that. And if you can find that authentic version of that, I think that's where, you can really make those connections with the eye contact, because eye contact shows confidence.
Yeah. All of it, right? All of it, but I think for most people, it's a difficult journey to get there, which is why it is a volume game, and why you can't just, and at a lot of, I went to Southwestern. At lower ranked schools, you do not get the amount through just OCI, through on-campus interviewing. You do not get the amount of volume that is necessary for this kind of exposure to becoming a better interviewer, right? You have to create it yourself, which is why, going back to the question of what should law students be doing now? Law students should now be trying to build out their network, so they're not just relying, especially if they go to a lower ranked school, on what the opportunities are that school is going to generate. Because you just, you go to a school like mine, I had, I think, 3 screeners at on-campus interviewing. That was not going to get me anywhere.
Right. I also think that, and see if you agree with me, that you can look, if the legal space, let's say you're new to the law school world, and the legal space you find very intimidating, I think that you can start somewhere else and working on these skills. Yeah. So if you like to volunteer, you could, at your volunteer opportunities, maybe you're meeting with the people who run the volunteer organization, really try and work on that professional persona there. Or one of the things I did after law school is I was on a nonprofit board. And it was interesting. I was starting my own business, and I will be honest, I was a really terrible salesperson. I hope people who have met with me on sales calls would not say that anymore. To the point that when my husband overheard my early sales calls, he would be like, that was really bad. Right?
You gotta love that.
And I was like, it wasn't that. And he's like, I wouldn't have wanted to pay you for you were like not confident. You didn't, he's like, let me tell you, what I think happened there. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was interesting is I learned how to do sales pitches by I ended up being the president of this board by doing fundraising pitches.
Right.
And because I really cared about this organization, it was about empowering adolescent girls, which is something I care a lot about, and leadership in adolescent girls. And I could go out and, I spoke on panels and I could just tell everybody why, like, this organization was going to change people's lives. And then after a while of doing that, I looked at myself. I'm like, why am I not speaking with the same confidence about my own business and my own self?
Right.
And, but it got easier to do that once I got really comfortable kind of playing that role. And it's something that was completely disconnected from work.
Right. No, I agree with that. And it goes back to, people always ask me, well, okay, well, how did you really get the Jones Day job? And frankly, the way that I got it was because that first summer of law school, I decided to take I worked at Public Counsel, which is a large pro bono law firm here in Los Angeles. And I did it not to be strategic, not to, get a big law job, but I did it because I cared about homelessness prevention. And I wanted some time to work on that while I was in law school. And actually it was through that though, that I met my Jones Day contact. So
interesting.
You never know when you're following your passion, which I agree 100% you should do, carve the time out to do that. You will work on these skills. You may actually meet that contact too, who will bring you back in. You just never know. So I think and it's also a part of sort of figuring out who you are, right? Like doing these things. So I think I completely agree and recommend that students do that to the extent they have time. It always comes down to time, right?
Right.
So you got to be strategic with your time.
Yeah, I actually had an informational interview with Jones Day, who was the dad of one of the kids I was tutoring for the SAT in law school.
Oh, wow.
SAT tutoring with so apparently Jones Day is just, you got to backdoor that.
You got to backdoor it, but it's worth it because, and just to plug my former firm, it's an amazing place. I stayed there 10 years, right? So
yeah, which is very impressive.
They treated me extremely well. I had 2 kids while I was there.
Also very impressive.
Well, yeah, but it was...
Well, impressive that you're a mom. Yay, I am too. Go 2 kids. But, I think BigLaw moms have a special place in my heart. I think that's a juggle that is not an easy one to do.
It's not, but the firm was very supportive. And by the time I left, there's so many people, for people who are interested in the firm, and I know it's almost recruiting season now, that is a firm that supports women in a huge way. And I can say that from my 10 years in, that was one of the reasons why I didn't want to leave, because I didn't want to go. I knew there were lots of firms out there that don't necessarily have the same level of support. And that's definitely a huge part for me. It's very, very important to have that balance.
Yeah, because it is, I have a 8-month-old, and
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm tired, but, I was at, I have a 4.5-year-old too, but I was at a mom group, and we were talking about a lot of people going back to work, and we were talking about work-life balance, and I was like, I don't even know that there is work-life balance. I just think there's a work-life juggle.
Right.
Some days you drop balls, some days you don't, but
something falls to the wayside always, and that's the thing. But if you don't have the support of the firm, meaning that they are aware, that they make accommodations for you and that they listen, right? Because it's really just, it comes back, it's the same thing, communication, right? They listen to your needs and they try to accommodate for them, right? If that doesn't exist, it's going to be almost impossible, I think, to be a mom in BigLaw.
I think that's true. Well, I think more firms need to take that advice, because it is still very hard in some firms.
Far to go.
Yeah, we have a long way to go, and you know that by the attrition rates in big firm life. Okay. Well, we could talk about mommy lawyering, but maybe that's a whole nother podcast. So, so you talk about the importance of personal branding and marketing, and how you learned this early on. So if you're a new law student that doesn't really know what this means, maybe you haven't been part of the business world or read anything about personal marketing and branding, what are some key points that people need to think about when creating a personal brand, or this idea of a personal brand?
Right. And I think it's even harder for law students because of what we talked about before, that a lot of law students are like, well, I don't know what I want to do, so how can I possibly come up with a way to brand myself in what I don't know.
Right.
And that's why in my book, it's actually why I wrote the book, was to provide a step-by-step guide to do this, right? To start with the internal work, start with learning just how to research and see what the possibilities are, and then start to play with this idea of, okay, if I do get stuck in an elevator for 2 minutes with somebody, how would I tell them in 2 minutes where I'm coming from, what my experience is, and what I'm interested in, right? And start to play with that even as a law student, like, okay, I have 2 minutes. What's my spiel? What's my narrative? What is my paragraph on LinkedIn? I always tell my students, are you on LinkedIn? And most people are, but do you have a narrative statement on LinkedIn? Most people don't.
I don't think I do.
Right? Most people don't, and it's a missed opportunity, especially for students to start to play. This is my creative side coming out, right? To really start to play with this idea of how am I going to put my outward facing self out to the world, right? And even students can do this. Even students who've only interned or worked in their dad's company or worked in a restaurant can do this, right? There's skills that you have picked up along the way that you can tell people about that translate to a legal career, even at your most, and playing with that and learning how to do that is branding to me. Yeah. And students can do that now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I was coming right out of college, I used the fact that I ran my collegiate a cappella group as a major selling point in all of my cover letters.
Yes. And it's interesting. People love that stuff because it's unique and it's you. And then you have those authentic conversations with people because even if they don't have experience doing that, they're interested.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, on LinkedIn, what's your opinion of the LinkedIn headshot? Because I feel like that we are seeing more and more of photos at parties, photos from weddings.
Yeah. Like the boyfriend's cut out in the photo. Yeah. No. You I mewill look, there's so many resources. I don't care what city you're in. You can go take, a $50, headshot. You can go to your school. The school often will have events where they'll have a photographer come. Yeah. I'm teaching the LLMs right now at USC, and a lot of them, they come from other countries and they come in and just the whole concept of an outward facing resume is new to them. Right. And I told them all, first thing, go get your photo. Yeah. Go get your photo done, and it should be a nice photo, and it should be a professional photo. Because trust me, even if you're doing just an info interview, even if you're just meeting someone for coffee, they will look you up on LinkedIn before. That's true. That is a given. Yeah. And you want to put that impression out there. Even if it's not a job interview, it's still a potential connection that could result in a job for you. And so it needs to be treated seriously, and your LinkedIn profile needs to be treated seriously. And it's really not that hard to do. No. It's just your resume, it's just expanding out on your resume and having a nice photo. Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, anyone who I meet with for a job interview who wants to work for me, I always look at LinkedIn just to see what's on there. Oh, yeah. And the photo, sometimes I'll be like, not so professional.
Nope. Yeah. Nope. Yeah. No. It's I call people out all the time.
Yeah. And so
for this, and I help them fix it.
Yeah. And so with the headshot, I'm a big believer that everyone needs to be in a jacket. What do you think? If you're in law school.
Sure. A jacket or a nice dress that is professional, right? And buttoned up. And it's like, why play around with this stuff, right? Everyone's going to have some sort of a suit jacket, Banana Republic, whatever it is.
Right. H&M. They've got,
Yeah. It's not hard. It's really not hard, to do this, and it makes all the difference.
Yeah, it really does. And I think, it is part of the game, how you present yourself, because somebody's looking at you and saying, like, how would they present themselves on my firm website? How would how would they present themselves to a client? And, I think a lot of people, find that they run up against a wall if they're like, I don't have enough money to do this or this. It's like, borrow clothes from a friend. Maybe you can pool resources, campaign your student council at your law school to bring in a photographer. Or if you're part of, like the Women's Law Association, maybe you guys can sponsor a photographer coming on campus. I think most students can utilize their resources to make this happen. But it's just an important thing to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. So We have listeners who know that BigLaw is their dream job, or they think that BigLaw is their dream job. So what is the best way to break into BigLaw? I know that you talk about the fact that you used kind of a back door to get into Jones Day. There's, of course, the traditional OCI trajectory. But how do you think is the best way to break into BigLaw? And then, you said you were pretty happy for 10 years in BigLaw. Do you think most people can be happy in BigLaw?
Right. So, this comes back, this truly is the core tenet of my program, right? Because it all started, I initially, when I was still at Jones Day, I started a blog for this purpose called breakintobiglaw.com. It's still live. And I started it because I was kind of upset that I was at Jones Day, this 3,500 person law firm, and I was the only graduate of my law school who worked there.
Okay.
And so I started this blog to sort of reverse engineer my journey and try to help people, and that's how this whole thing started. It was why I wrote the book, why I teach the class, right? And it comes down to this, if you want to break into BigLaw and you don't go to, one of the top schools, or if you go to a top school but your grades are not meeting the threshold, you have to network the heck out of it. Right? You have to, people will hire you for these jobs if they know you and they know that you can bring value to the firm, right? So in order to do that, you have to build up a network of people who know you, who behind the scenes are advocating for why you should get an interview, even though you don't go to that school or you don't meet that threshold. But there's a reason, right? And the way you do that is by building out the network, doing these informational interviews, finding firms that you're interested in, targeting people who work at those firms, meeting them, taking them out, going to their events, starting to volunteer at organizations where that firm has a presence. That's another backdoor way of doing it. You have to be really strategic. And I can tell you, because this was the thrust of my program for so long, I have literally helped hundreds of people do this, to get, to break in who don't necessarily go to the top schools.
Right.
And that's, and it takes time. Yeah. It's never a quick and easy thing, but I'll just give an example. The first class that I taught at Southwestern, they were all the recent graduates of Southwestern. They'd all taken the bar and they were all unemployed.
Okay.
And it was a very depressing.
I was like, that's a heavy room.
It was a heavy room, a lot of monkeys on the back in that room. And, and about half the room wanted BigLaw or wanted entertainment, another very difficult thing to break into. And it took a year, but by the end, I had 100% employment and jobs that they wanted, right? Wow. Whether it was a BigLaw firm or an entertainment firm or a firm that actually met their needs, somehow. Right. And it was because of this network building, right? And for those students, because they had the time, that this was hours a day of building this out and hundreds of meetings that resulted in this. So that's my advice. It's hard to hear, but it's a consistent strategic approach to plugging yourself into those firms.
Yeah, I think that's a really great story, because I think a lot of people feel lost if they graduate, they get their maybe they get their bar license, and then they think if they don't have a job, their kind of chances are slim that they're going to be happy.
Right. And this is a lot of people. This is, I get emails every day because of my platform now from this. And I have seen success. I wouldn't keep doing it if it was depressing and didn't work. It works. It's just a consistency factor, which is why I wrote the book the way I did, which is as a step-by-step daily guide, right? Because that's actually what works, is the consistent daily practice and the follow-up.
Right. So what do you think it takes, if you think that BigLaw is what you want, to be a happy BigLaw lawyer?
So it's related in that you have to come in eyes wide open, right? Yeah. To the firms that you're targeting, to the firms that you're interested in. You need to know how that firm works internally. You need to understand how, what your role is going to be at that firm, what kind of work you're going to get, how they're going to support whatever your various needs are, right? So part of it is an understanding of yourself, and the other part of it is connecting in and doing these interviews and figuring out what really goes on behind the scenes at those firms, because you're certainly not going to learn it from a quick networking event. You're not going to learn it from a brochure or a website, right? You're only going to learn it by connecting and getting to know the people who work there, and hearing from them what it's really like. And so that's another sort of benefit to doing these informational interviews from the beginning, is you will have a better sense of what really goes on behind the curtain at these places. And if you go in eyes wide open, you're much more apt to be happy because you knew
that's true
what you were getting into. And once you're in, know how to navigate the system, because at these firms, a lot of times that's what makes the difference between a happy experience and a not so happy experience, is knowing how to connect to mentors who will, help your career, who will get you the plum assignments, who will make sure, that you're supported, and then just coming in lost and not having that. Most people who leave, the attrition is because they felt like they got the shaft when they came in, right? They were just given some massive doc review and no direction, and they never got to do those trial, get those trial skills or do a deposition or anything. They're just churning, right? And, it's mentors and, senior people above you who will pull you up out of that, because that work exists, right? That's a reality of big law. Right. But there are better opportunities, but you need that person to signal you out and get you into those opportunities and make sure that you get them. And, these building out these networks beforehand will more ensure that you find those people.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice. So before we finish up, you left BigLaw to transition to a boutique firm. So can you share a little bit what's been the difference about being as a boutique firm? And is this something you planned, or did you just kind of look to opportunities as they knocked on your door?
Well, no, it's an interesting question. So I did not plan it. I was very comfortable in my position at Jones Day and doing quite well there. But then I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur. I've always done, I started the blog, and I've just had these side projects. And my two friends who were also Jones Day, they had left years before me, and they went and started their own firm. And I was watching their progress and seeing how busy and happy and just sort of how much fun they were having. And I would check in with them, and we'd have lunch. And then, finally it got to the point where they got so busy, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, which was basically come on board with us as a partner. Let's expand this thing. Let's grow this thing. You can continue doing all the stuff, your side projects. Let's make them part of your practice here. Yeah. And so it was just, the opportunity was just too huge to refuse. And I made the leap. But, I will say, the leap is a difficult one. It's, there's a lot of things I thought I knew about the practice of law that I had to learn. Yeah. It's almost 2 years now where I finally feel like a real lawyer. But that first year, the learning curve for me of running my own cases with no partner above me was just brutal. And talk about imposter syndrome. Talk about, talk about not knowing if I was completely just, going to ruin the life of my client or not by a decision, and going with the decision and then seeing it play out in a good way and winning and all of that, like owning that has been an incredible sort of roller coaster experience for me. And I'm glad I did it, but it was very tough. That's why it took me 2 years to finish my book, actually, because that year of the transition was incredibly difficult, and I felt like a baby lawyer again.
Well, and I think that's a really good, career and life lesson, is that, every time you pivot and change, there's going to be a learning curve, and you just have to come at it with the right mindset to get through it, and to know that you can gain those skills, or you can, if there are going to be holes in your knowledge, or there are going to be different things you have to educate yourself on, and you can. Allison and I talk about this starting our own business. We got together, started to start our own business, and then we were like, oh, well, we don't know anything about content marketing. I guess we better go read a book on content marketing. And then it became time to do accounting. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about accounting. I guess I better go learn how to keep some books, Right. And you kind of go step by step. And one of the things that I think is great about a legal education, and why I think it can be so valuable, is we're taught to be really great students. We're taught to really be good at learning stuff. And so you can pivot and change and learn, but you have to come at it knowing that you're ready for that. Because it's not always easy.
Yeah, and just keeping an open mind, and don't be too hard on yourself. I'm very hard on myself. And so I constantly have to just remind myself, it worked out last time, it'll probably work out this time. Yeah. Just have some faith.
Yeah, I think that's a lawyer personality trait, is being hard on yourself.
Right.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. But Rachel, this was really great. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I love talking with you.
Great. Well, we'll link to your book in the show notes so people can check it out. I know it's available both in hard copy and on Kindle. So if you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at Lee at lawschooltoolbox.com or Alison at lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. We'll connect, we'll include all of Rachel's contact information and her book information in the show notes. So feel free to check that out. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.